My very good friend Felicia got married in December of last year. I was one of her bridesmaids, and we had a bachelorette weekend at Daytona Beach, Florida, about a month before the wedding. There were 8 of us in total. Myself, Felicia, Andrea, Lorena, Julia, Renee, Caitlin, and Brittany. We rented a house off of Airbnb that was less than a mile away from the beach. The price that we got it for was almost too good to be true. When we got there, the place wasn't what we were expecting. That's not to say it was a complete dump. It did have a charm to it, but there was just something off about it. For one, it had a basement, which is incredibly rare to find in Florida. Down in the basement, there were 2 rooms connected by an archway. There also appeared to be several rushed renovations done throughout the home. Something that struck me as odd was that there was a space under the staircase that was fenced off. It was very bizarre to be staring at a literal chain link fence inside of a basement in Florida. But we figured it had something to do with the recent renovations and moved along. So the first day we spent shopping around town. That evening we went out for dinner, then went bar hopping afterwards. We didn't get back until around 1 a.m. We had all drank a considerable amount that night, so we didn't stay up and hang out. We just decided to call it a night and get ready for bed. Felicia and I slept in the same bed in the first section of the basement. Through the archway is where Andrea and Lorena slept. They pushed 2 twin beds together. Everyone else slept upstairs. So about 2 hours after everyone fell asleep, I randomly woke up and turned to my side, and I see the silhouette of someone moving silently past the bed towards the archway, where Lorena and Andrea were sleeping. The only thing that was providing any kind of light was from a streetlight outside coming through a small window, so I couldn't make out many details, but I could clearly see that whoever this person was wearing a baseball cap. Now, I had made the entire bridal party caps on my Cricut machine and handed them out to everyone when we first got there. So my first thought was that either Lorena or Andrea had gotten up to use the restroom, but then I thought about how strange it was that they would be wearing one of the caps I made them. Without a sound, the figure disappeared through the archway, and shortly after, I saw these brief flashes of light coming from the other room. It was almost as if someone was taking pictures. I began to internally freak out. I was thinking that someone was down there with us and was taking pictures of Andrea and Lorena while they slept. Felicia is a light sleeper, so I squeezed her hand to wake her up. As soon as her eyes opened, I whispered to her that I thought someone was in the house and that there were flashes coming from the other room. Felicia was the closest to the archway, so she got up and grabbed her phone off the dresser, which was on the far side of the basement, and peered into the other room with her cell phone. She climbed back into bed and told me that there was nobody there and that Andrea and Lorena were fast asleep. I was confused. I swear that I saw someone wearing a baseball cap walk into that room. I thought that maybe since I was in a new place, I might have been just seeing things and was overreacting. I eventually fell back asleep, and I tried to put the strange incident out of my mind and enjoy the rest of the trip. The next day we spent on the beach, and even went axe throwing later on. We got back in at around 10 p.m. We popped in a movie and chilled out for the rest of that night. We all fell asleep around midnight. About an hour after I fell asleep next to Felicia in the basement, we were all woken up by a loud scream coming from the next room. We then heard Lorena shouting, "Are you guys fucking with me?" We got up and went into the room to see what was going on. We found out that Lorena had not been sleeping and was just lying in her bed listening to her headphones. She turns over and sees a man wearing jeans and a jacket, and of course, a baseball cap. He was apparently standing next to her bed, facing the wall, and was smiling. That's when she closed her eyes tight, and when she looked again, the man was gone. And that's when she started screaming. Everyone who was sleeping in the basement started to gather their things, and it was decided that we would all sleep upstairs. However, with all of us being thoroughly freaked out and wide awake and had to leave early the next day anyways, we decided just to get the hell out of there. And I drove the 2.5 hours back to my place that night. Later on, Felicia decided to look up the history of the house we stayed in. What was odd is that since its construction in the 1920s, it has changed owners several times over the years. Nobody ever lived there for more than 5 years at most. Felicia did inform the owner of the house what happened, but the owner just brushed it off, saying that they never heard of anyone having that kind of experience there before. But strangely, when we tried to look up the house to see if it was still available, the listing was completely gone from the website. If it had just been me who saw the man in the baseball cap, I might have been able to dismiss this whole thing. But Lorena saw him as well, and he seemed to vanish into thin air after he appeared. I'm convinced that we all experienced something paranormal at that house. This happened back in '87. Me and my friend Danishka were visiting my mother, who lived in Iowa at the time. I've always told her about the paranormal experiences I had growing up, and I always promised that I would someday take her for a walk through my haunted neighborhood, and on this particular visit she held me to that. We began heading north up the street that my mother lived on, which meant that we were heading up a steep hill. At the top of this hill, we crossed the opposite side of the street, then entered a yard. It was quite dark at this point, and I was trying to find familiar paths from my childhood, but things had changed a lot since I had last made the neighborhood rounds. In my old neighborhood, the yards were massive. The backyards were the size of football fields or even bigger. We were technically trespassing. We made our way to the back of a property where we found a lovely little bridge that crossed a small creek. Then there was another short path that led through to the next yard. We headed west, past dark homes towards the road. The last house had a totem pole next to it. This totem pole was a very odd piece of art. It didn't stand upright, but instead curved like a huge donut sunk halfway into the ground. It felt cold, like ceramic or plaster, but I guess its composition could have been fiberglass. It was decorated with an array of oddities. A huge ear, about 1 meter in length, the face of a king from a deck of cards, a large brain, and mushrooms. This thing was so weird and random that I almost guarantee if you were driving or walking past it, you would stop and think to yourself, am I really seeing this right now? The thing looked like an acid trip realized in an incredibly weird sculpture. Me and Danishka only stayed a short time. I was weary of a large dog that I knew patrolled that property. We made off for the church grounds. Once there, we lied down in the parking lot to catch a glimpse of the stars above. After a short while, we heard audible whispers and giggles. I remember thinking that there might have been some small children playing nearby, but something else seemed to pervade. It wasn't a sound, but a sense. It felt malignant, vile, evil. Danishka could feel it as well, and we both sat upright and instinctively began to scoot slowly together, so we were back to back as we sat. All the sounds of the night vanished as an unnerving silence surrounded us. As we stood to our feet, a low growling sound came from the darkness. We both decided right there and then that we had to get the hell out of there. We cut through a densely wooded backyard that opened to a field that led back to Mom Street. The growling sound moved in front of us. Mind you, I could physically see nothing, but the presence was unmistakable. I tapped Danishka on the shoulder, indicating the direction of our next move with a nod. Suddenly we took off towards the road. I then felt what I can only describe as pure rage, as the unseen thing began to pursue us. We got within 100 feet of my mom's house, and the thing tried to cut us off. We could still see nothing, but we could certainly hear it. The panic state that we were in did not allow us to question our sanity. We both just knew that we were in serious danger from something that we couldn't see. We quickly ducked down to hide behind a truck topper that had a patch of tall grass growing around it. Danishka dropped to her knees next to me, gasping, "What the fuck was that?" For a moment, I didn't feel that the thing was nearby. I ignored her question and made a break for my mom's house. I hate to say it, but I was out to save myself, not even stopping for a millisecond to check if Danishka was right behind me. I got to the gate that separated the neighbor's yard from my mother's. I fumbled with the latch, and that's when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, as the thing loudly made its presence known, directly behind us. Finally, I managed to open the gate, and we sprinted across the expansive front lawn towards the driveway. We were running so fast that we woke what sounded like hundreds of sleeping birds, who all fled from the trees lining the driveway. We then heard a cacophony of screeches. At first, I thought it was the birds, but I soon realized it was the unseen thing that was now hot on our heels and closing in. Outside of the abject fear, there also seemed to be some kind of weird space-time thing happening. I don't think I can put it into words, but my surroundings just felt twisted and slightly off. It was almost as if wherever this thing happened to be, it distorted reality itself. Perhaps it was just the effects of the terror that I was experiencing. Finally, we made our way towards the front gate of my mom's house. We didn't break step until we hit the gate and quickly climbed over. It felt like the scene from The Omen, where the man was running from the evil dogs in the cemetery. I heard my dog Benji barking in the backyard as we managed to scale the front gate without impaling ourselves. We then crashed through the gate that led into the backyard and collapsed onto some lawn chairs. We were panting and almost laughing. It would be fair to say that we were both a little hysterical. We could no longer feel the dark presence, and when we finally collected ourselves, we sat and talked in hushed voices about what we had just experienced. As we did, we could hear that my mother's horses in the pasture behind her house had come up to the fence, which kept them out of the backyard. My dog trotted down the stone path to greet them, and we followed. We made our way to the fence and began petting and cooing the horses. It was unusual for them to gather at the fence like this. Zeus, who was my mother's largest stallion, took a step back and then looked straight into my eyes. His stance was almost threatening, like he was a bull preparing to charge. We backed away from the fence. He then proceeded to take a long, drawn-out piss. Me and Danishka began laughing and were completely taken off guard when the thing dropped down from above. It landed directly between Zeus and myself, but on my side of the fence. We felt a massive thud reverberate through the ground, as the thing now stood about 3 feet from us. Its appearance is very difficult to explain. My brain attempted to create a mass in the general vicinity of the thing, but it was like watching those transparent fumes that form above fires. The horses, including Zeus, all scattered. Absolutely speechless, I looked at Danishka, my mind searching for any sort of reasoning. The next thing I remember is seeing myself from behind, running in a panic. Not through my eyes, but through the thing's eyes. My vision came back to me as Danishka and I reached the back porch. Benji was already inside, via his own doggy door. I was tempted to jump through it myself, but my higher logic convinced me just to turn the doorknob instead. Danishka and I didn't stop until we ran to the front of the house and into the living room. Once we were there, we became oddly calm and collected. After a while, I went to the desk in the corner of the room and removed a pen and paper. Danishka switched on the stereo, and we sat on the sofa, pen in hand, and wrote down our experience. Danishka and I did not speak further of this incident for the rest of that night. We simply waited for the sun to come up, which was thankfully uneventful. I grew up in Mexico, and I've had many paranormal experiences there, but this one is by far the scariest. I woke up one night in a panic. I couldn't breathe. When I became fully awake, I realized that my pillow was covering my face and was being pressed down at force. I shared my room with my older brother Antonio, who would pull pranks on me while I was sleeping from time to time, so that's what I assumed was happening. But as I started to flail my arms, the pressure became heavier. It was then that I thought an intruder had entered the house and was trying to kill me. Using all my might, I moved my head back and forth, which created an air pocket that allowed me to breathe. After a few more seconds, the pillow suddenly dropped from my face, and I quickly threw it off of me and sat up in bed. I looked to my side to see Antonio standing over me. "What the hell? Are you trying to kill me?" As soon as I said that, I caught a glimpse of someone on my brother's bed, which was adjacent to mine. I saw my brother sleeping. I looked back to the person that was standing next to my bed. I blinked again and again, but every time I opened my eyes, I saw my brother's face staring back at me. The doppelganger then raised his finger to his lips and said, "Shh, we don't want to wake the others." He then smiled at me, showing me a mouth of razor-sharp teeth. The rest of his face seemed to melt away slowly until there was nothing but a dark figure, entirely featureless except for that terrifying toothy smile. After seeing the disturbing figure, my blanket lifted up and pulled itself over my face. It was obvious that this thing was trying to kill me. My left arm was trapped beneath the blanket, but my right arm, which was closest to my nightstand, was still free. I felt around until my hand wrapped around a crucifix resting on my nightstand. I held it up and began to pray aloud. As I did, I could feel the blanket begin to ease off of me. When it became loose enough to move my left arm, I threw the blanket off and sat up and faced the dark figure which was still next to my bed. I raised the crucifix towards it, and it recoiled and started to back away. As I moved back, I got up from my bed and began walking towards it, all the while praying aloud. The commotion woke up my brother, and he too sat up in bed and saw the evil carnation in our room. He was in complete shock. The entity then let out an awful screech before vanishing into thin air. When it was over, I turned to my brother, and he asked me what the hell that thing was. I only uttered a single word before climbing back into my bed with the crucifix held tightly in my hands. Diablo. There's always a reason to be afraid.